Hello and welcome to our midweek meditation. I'm Victor Kim. I'm the lead minister here at Richmond Presbyterian Church, and it's good to be with you as we engage in this conversation as part of our midweek meditation. For those of you who've been watching our midweek meditations, you'll know that over the past few weeks, we have been engaging in conversations with agencies and organizations in and around Richmond that are in the ministry or in the work of assisting people, especially people who may be most vulnerable, and in particular in this time of the pandemic, where the needs are, I think, even more apparent than before. So thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Tonight, or today, our guest is Susan Johnson, and Susan is one of the committee members, organizing committee members with Safe Arms Richmond, which is an organization of a number of different churches, we'll talk more about this, that are involved with refugee support, sponsorship. Now, I want to just kind of preface this talk by reflecting on something that I said earlier in a sermon around hospitality, which is that hospitality is really about making space and space for change to take place. And I think oftentimes we think that what that means is making space for other people so that they can change and be transformed. But really, I think hospitality in its essence, in its pure essence, is about making space within us so that we might be changed, so that our thinking and our seeing and our understanding can be transformed by what God does with us. And I think if we understand this metaphor of Jesus as the good shepherd, and Jesus looking for the sheep of his flock, I kind of get the sense that when we are changed, when we in our hospitality make space in our hearts so that we are the first ones changed, then we begin to see the world around us with the same sort of eyes with which Jesus does. And we begin to see other people, especially those people who are in need, those who are marginalized, those who are oppressed, those who are what our society might call difficult. We begin to see them with the same compassion and the same love and the same grace that Jesus sees all of us. And I think that's part of what drives the organizations and the people in these organizations that are wanting to help, that are wanting to support those people that are most vulnerable at this time. So this is the conversation that I want to have with Susan. So Susan is a member of Gilmore Park United Church. I know that she's on the board there, and she also heads up their mission and outreach committee, if that's correct. And I've met Susan in a number of different occasions here in Richmond over the past few years, and it's good to be in conversation with you, Susan, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So as I said, you're part of the organizing committee for Safe Arms Richmond. So could you tell us a little bit about Safe Arms Richmond, maybe about its history, how it got its start, what it does specifically, and who now are the coalition members of Safe Arms Richmond?
Thank you. So in the fall of 2015, Reverend Maggie Watts Hammond at Gilmore Park United Church received a request from Mosaic, which is a society which specifically deals with the needs of immigrants and refugees, addressing all of the multiple needs. So we at Gilmore Park received a request from Mosaic to consider being the co-sponsor with two Canadian Syrian families living in Richmond who wanted to sponsor some of their family members who had UN refugee status. Mm. Reverend Maggie called a meeting and opened the invitation to a few other of Richmond churches that we thought might be interested, and about 30 people attended that meeting. At that time, the devastation in Syria was constantly in the press, and the need for safe haven for folks on the wrong side of the conflict was well known. We, after that meeting and representatives going back to their church boards and so on, we decided to proceed with those two sponsorships and to give ourselves the names of Safe Arms Richmond. And Safe Arms Richmond is a nod to the north and south arms of the Fraser River, with Richmond, the three islands of Richmond, being in between those two arms. So we called ourselves Safe Arms Richmond, and proceeded to get to work with filling in the paperwork and getting to receive those two families. Now, those two groups of family members arrived between August and November of 2017. So that was about a 2-year interval from the time we had our first meeting till the time they arrived. And that's very typical. It would be very unusual for that time to be less than 2 years. Those families, because they already had family members here established as Canadian citizens, they were well shepherded by their own families. We contributed to their support financially, and we had some social times together, but we didn't really have to do a lot of hands-on support because the families already had well-established family members here in Canada. It was also necessary for them to move out of Richmond to secure less expensive accommodation. And so that further reduced our opportunity to have a hands-on involvement. But we still made a good impact with those two families, we believe, and different members of the committee keep in personal contact with emails and so on every couple of months.
Mhm.
Those families came to us already with education from their own countries, some English, and of course a willingness to go to school, a willingness to study. And so they were well situated to settle in Canada. And of course, they missed their home country. They missed relatives who were left behind. They were greatly distressed by the havoc in their home country, but
Mhm.
at least they were safe.
Mhm.
So that was there's a whole lot more to that, but just as a personal word, that's how I met Isabel Evans from your congregation,
Mhm.
because she was the key rep from your congregation. And she and I and a couple of the reps from South Arm Church kind of formed the inner committee that did a lot of the paperwork and did a lot of the organizing and so on. And those were very good times we had together. We also could go for lunch together after we did some of our organizing and filled in some of our paperwork. So
Back in
that
the days, back in the days when you could actually go for lunch.
we could actually go for lunch. That's right.
Mhm.
So then, who is currently involved in in Safe Arms Richmond? It's 4 of the churches in Richmond. So your church, Richmond Presbyterian, which was initially represented by Isabel, and now, of course, by Vic Beltran. And Gilmore Park United Church, my church, and I and Bonnie Parker are the 2 key reps there. South Arm United Church, the key contacts are Joanne Malish and Colleen Bell. And Richmond United, the key contacts are Yvonne Bell and Orville Chapman.
Mm.
Those of you who are active in other initiatives around Richmond will recognize many of these same names in issues related to food security and affordable housing and supported housing. We all keep bumping into each other regularly around Richmond, and it's been a real pleasure to get to know these folks from other congregations. So
Susan,
that's kind of a brief history. And
thank you. Let me follow up on that, because I think you raise a very, very interesting and important point, which is that we do find the same people over and over again in these different organizations that are trying to meet the needs of those who are most vulnerable in our midst. And so there's got to be something there that motivates, that compels, that convicts people to say, I need to be involved, whether it's working with issues around homelessness, whether it's around food security, whether it's around refugee sponsorship, whether it's other issues, again, advocating for those who are on the margins of our society. So maybe I'll ask you, why did you choose to be involved in these issues? And for example, why do you care about refugee sponsorship? It's such an overwhelming issue. We know that, again, most of us are basically winners of the lottery of life by virtue of where we happen to be born. And the fact that we're born into a free, democratic, Western country where we take for granted so much, but the majority of the world's population are not born into the context that we are. And so, just by the virtue of our birth, we have won the lottery in many ways. But issues like refugees are such a huge issue. Why do you get involved? What compels you to be involved in the things that you are? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a Christian family where our Christian faith was strongly linked to social service. This was modeled in all of the adults in my life. And although I cannot begin to compare myself to some of them, that influence remains to this day. Then, as a young adult, I was away from the church for many years, as often happens. And then I think maybe when I became a mother, or a few other things happened, I returned to the church as a seeking adult and found my spiritual home in the United Church. And one of the things that drew me there was that the United Church historically has had a strong commitment to social justice. So I also appreciate Reverend Victor has told me about your current initiative with going deeper with God and wider with the world. And so I appreciate belonging to a church where study and questioning is encouraged. And there aren't always pat answers. In fact, most of the really good answers aren't pat at all. They're challenging and they're interesting and they're complex. So so that was it was my own upbringing, and then my own study and reflection. And I just want to pick up on exactly what you said, Reverend Victor, because I had written out that I'm well aware, and I didn't use the winning the lottery, but I've heard that phrase used before. I'm well aware of how fortunate I am to have been born in post-World War II Canada, riding that wave of prosperity through the 50s and 60s, nurtured in a loving family and given the opportunity for further education and choices. And I'm indeed grateful for all of that, and I don't take it for granted. However, I don't think I can sit back then and simply be thankful for all of my blessings and not feel hurt for others who lack the basic safety and security and dignity of ordinary existence. So it's overwhelming when I'm sitting in my nice den, you're sitting in your nice den, and we sometimes I get overwhelmed, as we all do, with the needs in the world, but we can just keep doing at least one thing at a time. Some people can do 2 or 3 things at a time, but we can just keep doing one thing at a time. So those are some of the things that motivate me. I also was saying to Reverend Victor the other day when we spoke that I've done a lot of readings. When I came back to the church, I did a lot of readings about Christianity and indeed about other faiths. And it became very clear to me, and actually very reassuring to me, that compassion and caring for the stranger in our midst is a common tenet of almost all of the major faiths of the world. And that, in fact, gives me great hope for our world. I think that in terms of my own involvement, I believe there are many ways we can reach out. Some of those are done at home, some in the province or nationally, and some internationally. And none of us can do all of these, but we can all do some of them. And one of the verses of scripture that inspires me is from Matthew 25:35. Most of you will know the longer passage, but it concludes with, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in." So I guess the sum of it is that if I'm going to live my faith and truly strive to be a disciple, I have to live a compassionate life.
Susan, thank you for sharing that. I know it's deeply meaningful for you, obviously. I really like so much of what you've said right now. Another passage that occurs to me is again from the Gospels, which says that to whom much is given, much is expected. And we really have been given much. Again, whether some of that is, by virtue of just of where we're born. Some of that, obviously, you've said, is by the virtue of the people who have borne witness to us, right? Our parents, grandparents, and others who we look up to, who have set that witness for us, that example for us. And again, you may have had that when you were younger, you may have wandered for a while, but again, those foundations were set in you, and you return to them looking, exploring. But again, it's so important to have the example of good, strong witnesses who don't necessarily have to tell you, they just do, they live it. And we see that as young people, and I think it leaves something on us. And when we get older, we want to return to it. And so, yeah, to whom much is given, we're not only talking about, resources, but we're talking about care and love and witness and example. To whom much is given, much is expected. I like the passage that you quoted from Matthew's gospel about the text around the sheep and the goats. And what I've always enjoyed about that is when Jesus tells the sheep, when I was hungry, you fed me, and thirsty, you gave me something to drink, they respond by saying, but when did we see you? And the same thing with the goats. When Jesus says, when I was hungry, you didn't. When I was thirsty, you didn't. And their answer, of course, is, but when did we see you like this? Because we saw you, we would have helped you. And of course, the whole point is you don't go looking for Jesus. You just do what is right, because all of us are created in God's image. Every single life is created in God's image. And every single life deserves the dignity that we certainly take granted for us. I thank you for sharing those things with us. Currently, I know that Safe Arms is involved in a sponsorship arrangement with two parts of a family. We have a person who lives in Vancouver,
Right.
but her family, her extended family, parents, sisters, brother, and their children are now just outside of, is it Kampala in
Yes.
Uganda? They're designated as UN refugees, and we're working with a process to again try to bring them here. I know that's, as you said, it's a long process, and I've been involved with refugee sponsorship back when I was in Calgary and at my church there, as well as RPC, Richmond Presbyterian, has been involved here. And I know how difficult this process of sponsorship can be, because we're talking about half a world away. We're talking about a context which is not predictable, where there is conflict and war, where the things that we take for granted, computerized systems for everything, records for everything, healthcare available, are very, very spotty, and things can get delayed for all sorts of reasons. I know some sponsorships that have taken many, many years to see through. I'm really grateful that Safe Arms is working on this particular sponsorship. Can you tell us, how can people who are interested support the work of Safe Arms Richmond? What are you looking for, and how can people help?
Okay. So I'll just give you a little bit more background information about these folks. And Isabel was still part of the group when we went for the original meeting with the Canadian member of the family, a lovely woman, probably in her late 20s, named Sandrine. Isabel probably has a picture of her. Might even be on your bulletin board. I'm not sure. So this family was they're from the Congo, and which was the Congo, and then it was Zaire, and now it's the Congo gang. And they were on the wrong side of the ethnic wars there, and were forced to flee, or certainly the men in their family unit would have been killed, and other people in their town were killed that night. So they went into hiding around their town or village, and then with the decided that they had to flee um, to Zimbabwe, which was the nearest border. It took them 6 weeks to walk to Zimbabwe, and along the way, the daughter, who was in her 20s, and she was there with her husband, the daughter in the 20s gave birth on the side of the road,
Mhm.
and they paused for that, and they kept on walking 6 weeks to get to the border. So that in itself shows the level of desperation that they must have felt. So as Reverend Victor says, nothing is exact when dealing with multiple governments and agencies, but at this time, the best guess is that these two families will arrive approximately a year, 15 months from now, late spring or early summer of 2022. And we, Safe Arms, our four churches, will be responsible for their full support, including housing, food, transportation, clothing, etc., for 12 months after arrival. And using the Government of Canada's calculator, we will need $60,000 to provide this support for 1 year. We currently have over 25,000 on hand from previous contributions, and some of the participating churches have indeed either raised money or had money as a line item in their budget in the last year or two, and so are holding that money. So we on the committee do not think that that is going to be difficult. Our biggest job, of course, will be to find them housing in Richmond, and we have a couple of angles to work there. At the end of the 1 year, it would be really great if we could have them at least on the wait list, if not into BC housing. That would be an excellent goal, but we cannot put them into BC housing when they first arrive. So then besides the housing, of course, then there are things like the furniture and clothing and some sports equipment, maybe a couple of bicycles, et cetera, and groceries. And so those will be our main responsibilities. I think that given our four congregations, we won't have any trouble once we have the housing, outfitting it with furniture, lamps, bookshelves, and I can see us rounding up some soccer balls and bicycles and things for the kids as well. We're trying to look at some creative and fun ways of dividing up the responsibilities. You know, maybe one choir will want to take on toiletry products for the bathroom. You know, that would be kind of fun. And maybe I don't know that any of us have really thriving youth groups anymore, but the youth in the churches could be responsible for sourcing some secondhand bicycles and soccer equipment and skipping ropes and other games and toys that can be used without English language. The other part of this that I think will be kind of interesting for us, because I know our congregations have a number of retired folks. I come from an education background. A number of my friends come from the health background. We will need to assist them with what are called settlement issues, learning to use transportation, accessing medical and dental, getting registered for English classes for the adults, and of course, registering the children at school, helping them with shopping and making wise decisions about where to go to get the best value for their monies. And given that they're two teenagers, and I hope we'll get them into high school, I really think it would be good if we would offer to set up some tutoring for them. And I know we have a number of retired teachers in our congregation, so I'm sure we could work with that. And also we don't have to do all of this ourselves. There are wonderful services in the Lower Mainland. Many of you have heard of Mosaic, you've heard of Success, you've heard of Chimo, there's the food bank. There are wonderful services in Richmond and elsewhere in the Lower Mainland. There's even counseling for folks who have been mistreated or abused, you know, as part of what they fled from. So I think that we will have many folks in our congregations who would welcome these tasks and in fact would get pleasure out of them and would enjoy shepherding these folks through their first year.
Mhm.
You know, I also have a little hidden agenda for myself because I look at this as a wonderful opportunity to build bridges between and among our congregations. I it's kind of sometimes it distresses me how all the Christian congregations it's easy to exist in our own little silos. We've all got our ways of doing things and our histories and our traditions and so on. But I just have so much enjoyed, as I said before, meeting the folks that I've met, folks like Isabel and Vincent from your congregation, folks from South Arms, folks from Church on Five, folks from St. Albans. My goodness, there are just so many wonderful folks involved in social justice issues in Richmond. And I think we can all benefit and grow in faith from working with each other. And you know what? We also have a lot of fun together. And so I hope that gives you some good ideas. We do need to raise some money, but I don't think that's going to be onerous. But I think we also will have opportunities for people to serve in a hands-on way.
That's wonderful. I think you're absolutely right. We are better when we're united and we
Mhm,
are together. And there is much that we as congregations and Christians and individuals,
mhm,
disciples of Jesus, can do when we come together and bring all of the capacity and the resources and the imagination and the abilities that we've been blessed with towards a project. Certainly whether it's some of the things that we've worked on together or on refugee sponsorship.
mhm.
I have a very funny story about refugee sponsorship. As you know, as you said, settlement issues are huge
Mhm,
because this is a completely new context to
mhm,
people that have been living in Africa, who have been living in refugee camps and now in some of the slum areas outside. Can you imagine a refugee camp being too dangerous?
mhm,
So you have to go actually into the cities.
mhm,
But we had a family come from Somalia,
mhm,
and we had purchased a home in Calgary,
mhm.
and Calgary gets pretty cold in the
Yeah.
winters, a lot colder than Vancouver, and a
Mhm.
lot colder than Somalia. And
Yeah.
so this family had come over from Somalia, and what they discovered was that the winters were very cold, but certain parts of the house had heat coming out of it. And
Mhm,
of course, I'm talking about these heat registers, right?
mhm,
Where the heating, we have the central heating, and
mhm,
the ducts and the vents, and these heat registers have hot air blowing out of them.
mhm,
And they figured out that wherever these heat registers were, that's where hot air came out. And
mhm.
they wanted to be warm. So they decided that if they could make the hole bigger, there would be more heat.
Oh.
So of course, if you don't know, because you've never lived in a house with this sort of HVAC system,
Mhm.
um, they took a hammer and they started breaking the wall around the heat
Oh
register.
my.
So because they figured they would get more heat. And of
Mhm,
course, we came by the house one day only to find the wall had been demolished around the heat register. And we found out, well, because they wanted to be warmer. We said,
mhm,
well, just turn up the heater.
mhm,
So
mhm,
these are little things that make us smile. Um, and sometimes the stories end with wonderful stories of success.
mhm,
Sometimes they're difficult, and we have to be ready for that too.
mhm,
And I know that not all stories of refugee sponsorship end with them being able to integrate successfully, go to school. Sometimes the stories are difficult,
mhm,
and it is challenging. But I
mhm,
think what you're talking about is persevering, again, seeing through the eyes that Jesus, our good shepherd, sees all of us, and making a difference for just a small part of the world. And if all of us can do that, well, that will make a big difference.
mhm,
Um, I'm really grateful for our conversation. I know that for those people at Richmond Presbyterian who are watching this and say, how do I help? How do I help? Well, you go and talk to Vic Beltran on our outreach and mission committee. You can talk to me, you can talk to Isabel. There are lots of ways in which you can help. And I know that our congregation will continue to support our part of this Safe Arms Richmond ministry around refugee sponsorship. So I'm delighted to have this conversation with you. I want to wish you well. I want to wish you and the people at Gilmore Park and Reverend Maggie and everyone well. And I look forward to continuing our work together. And I look forward to being able to report sometime in the future that our sponsored refugees have come and that they have settled in. And we'll give thanks.
Good. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah.